what is the attachment theory?
So there's 4 of them. Every single person has one. Attachment theory is basically the study of how your childhood relationships and events condition how you're going to show up in your adult romantic relationships, but really your adult every relationship. The known thing about anxious attachment styles is they're boundaryless.
Yes.
Securely attached individuals report having the longest lasting relationships, but almost more importantly, report being the most fulfilled.
Okay, Thais Gibson, are you ready to dream bigger?
I am ready. I'm excited.
So I want to start off with asking you, what is the attachment theory for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, so attachment theory is basically the study of how your childhood relationships and events condition how you're going to show up in your adult romantic relationships, but really your adult every relationship. So the original body of work was traditional attachment theory with John Bowlby out of Cambridge University and later Mary Ainsworth. And we'll talk about the 4 attachment styles and all of that. But the body of work was so amazing and really helped understand different patterns. But what was sort of incomplete is it said, okay, if you're insecurely attached, here's your attachment style, good luck. And it didn't really give a lot of feedback or support in terms of the neuroscience of how to change. So our body of work is Gibson integrated attachment theory, which isn't just taking those 4 attachment styles, but actually going into the neuroscience of how to change and become secure. The way I like to think of your attachment style as a whole is it is your subconscious set of rules that you've learned about love. So it's what we expect in relationships, whether we're aware of it or not. It's how we tend to try to meet each other's needs in relationships. It's how we communicate and express love and care. And because each attachment style has such unique and different subconscious rules and assumptions about how relationships are supposed to look, it's almost like you can sit down and play a board game and you have a different set of rules for the game. It's like You try to sit down, we're going to become new friends, and you have the rules for Scrabble and I have the rules for Monopoly. And no matter how smoothly you want the board game to go, there's just going to be unnecessary friction and challenges when you don't recognize that that's happening.
So then what are the different attachment styles? Let's just go through each of them.
Yeah, so there's 4 of them. Every single person has one. The first one is the securely attached style. Securely attached people represent roughly 50% of the population. Securely attached individuals report having the longest lasting relationships, but almost more importantly, report being the most fulfilled in those long lasting relationships. And I think that that really matters because I've seen many times over the years in my practice or in our online programs that people can be in a relationship, but they're not necessarily happy.
They're just like in it to be in it.
Exactly. So, and the other thing too that's really interesting is securely attached individuals, the data actually really mirrors the divorce rate. So what you see is they tend to move in lockstep with one another. So roughly 50% of the population is securely attached. The divorce rate is roughly 50%. As the secure attachment rate on the past decade has been on the decline ever so slightly, the divorce rate has been on the incline, and they tend to really move together.
And wait, so typically do secure attachment style people also tend to partner with other secure?
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the neuroscience of why, because it actually really determines who we're attracted to as well, which we can get into. But yes, securely attached people usually find each other, end up in relationships, stay in those relationships. And so it seems like a lot of people will say, I feel like there's no securely attached people out there. But a lot of times they just get into relationships relatively young a lot of the time and stay in them. So securely attached kids, they form, and I want to make a sort of sidebar here. Your attachment style develops in your childhood, but we're being reconditioned all the time. So just because we have a certain attachment style in childhood doesn't mean that it's fixed and doesn't mean that it can't change over time. And so securely attached individuals, what they get in their childhood, assuming that's where their attachment style is forming and staying, they get what we call approach-oriented behavior in psychology. And what that means is that their parents or caregivers are deeply attuned to them. And they notice when the child is feeling dysregulated or distressed, and they make a huge effort to approach them, soothe them, and check if they're okay. That sounds like a small thing, but it has a massive impact. The reason being that it teaches a child indirectly through their conditioning that I am loved even when I'm having a bad day or I'm emotional. I am loved as I am. I can be my full self with people, and I am received and respected and cared for. I can trust that I can rely on other people, and I feel worthy of love as I am. And as a response to that, they grow up with a lot of that modeling, a lot of that conditioning. It's what they get, and so it's what they give.
So actually, the reason I'm like writing down notes because I actually wanted to bring this up because so my husband and I are both secure attachment styles. We've been together for 13 years and like extremely obsessed with each other.
Oh, that's so nice.
But what I want to ask you is, what can parents do to raise secure, attached children? So yes, it is being there, but like, can you give us real life examples? Like as an example, like if your like little kid misbehaves, like how do you react and ensure that you're being a parent that makes them feel like loved and heard while still being a disciplinary figure,
It's
I suppose?
a fantastic question. So the idea is to move towards what we call authoritative parenting. So it's not authoritarian. People often get them confused. It's authoritative. So what you want to be able to do is validate a child's emotions. Hey, honey, I see you're distressed, or I see you're upset. Are you okay? And then a really great thing to follow up with is, what do you need? And when you start teaching a child, okay, these are your emotions, I'm validating them, that actually allows a child to learn to start self-attuning and conditions the relationship where they can notice what they're feeling. And that's a huge foundational building block of self-soothing as an adult. You have to know what you're feeling and then learn what you're needing. And it's something securely attached kids grow up with. So they get the approach-oriented behavior. They get the validation of their emotions. It mirrors to them that I can feel my emotions. My emotions are safe to experience rather than I try to dissociate from them, which is what you see in a lot of insecurely attached individuals. And when you can start asking a child what they need, it allows them to be empowered to make requests, to communicate, to develop emotional literacy. So that's a really great place to start. However, it doesn't mean that you're always going to meet the child's needs. That actually falls into permissive parenting, where it's like, oh, my child's sad, they want candy, they're crying, I'll give them the candy all the time. That actually causes a child as an adult to end up numbing out and escaping into things more than anything else, because they get received in terms of, I just get what I want. And when they don't know how to soothe. So we negotiate needs. So let's say, for example, that you have a child, and we could go down a big rabbit hole here, but let's say you have a child and they are crying and it's 9 p.m. and they're very young. And they say, I want candy. And you say, it's not a good time for them to have candy.
Yeah.
So you might say, honey, I know you want candy. I understand that you like candy. But if you go to sleep right now and you have candy before you go to bed, it's going to keep you up and you're not going to sleep well and you're not going to feel good tomorrow at school. How about this? If you eat all of your dinner tomorrow and eat your vegetables, we can have a little bit of candy after dinner. So what you're teaching a child is that it doesn't mean you're always going to get your needs met, but we can negotiate. We can hash it out. I can try to compromise a little bit, come towards you a little bit. And I can also explain why it's not appropriate sometimes. So it teaches a child to understand that they can't always get what they want. And so all of those little ingredients together, we could go into so many, but those are some really great building blocks to start at, where the child's being emotionally validated, they're learning their needs, they're learning to self-attune because they're getting attuned to, and they're learning to communicate and negotiate. And these are huge building blocks of secure attachment.
Essentially, it's not just like a no. It's like here's why. Like, it's almost treating a child like you would an adult.
Yeah.
And explaining like rationale.
Exactly. And that allows a child to feel like, okay, my needs matter. I'm safe to take up space. I can be seen and heard. I may not always get what I want, which is the reality of being an adult, but I deserve to take up space, be seen, heard, understood. And it teaches and fosters healthy communication. And those are just such important, because I'm in this body of work all the time and I see this all the time, I cannot begin to stress how meaningful it is to have those building blocks to go through life with, because the vast majority of people go through life, if they weren't securely attached, all of our insecure attachment styles, they go through life and they end up in situations where they, first of all, don't know how to communicate, have never been taught healthy modeling for that, have poor boundaries because they've never negotiated or talked about their needs. They're not attuned to themselves. So they soothe through things or anxiously holding on to other people and haven't developed a capacity to self-soothe. And all of these things cause so much destruction and devastation, not just in our personal relationships, but in the relationship to ourselves, how we view ourselves, in our workplace relationships. Like, communication and the ability to have hard conversations is almost a non-negotiable to be successful in life. And so a lot of those things simply aren't taught to our insecure attachment styles.
So, and I want to get into the other attachment styles, but before I do, since we're on this little rabbit hole, what I also want to know is, say someone does an excellent job parenting when their child is young, and the child at that age develops a secure attachment style. Does that change over time? Like, as an example, can your teenage experiences or even your adult experiences change your attachment style?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yes and no. The overarching answer is a definite yes. So we are being conditioned all the time. How we adopt our patterns and how we're actually being conditioned is through repetition and emotion. And here's something really crazy that was so life-changing for me 15 years ago when I started getting into this stuff, is that your conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. And your conscious mind, which is your logical thinking self, analytical self, and your subconscious is your habituated self, your conscious mind is responsible for 3 to 5% of all of your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions on a daily basis. Your subconscious, this warehouse of your conditioning, is 95 to 97%.
It's insane,
Yeah. And so that's why we do things like, I'm going to set a New Year's resolution. I'm going to quit eating chocolate. And 2 days later, you're eating chocolate. You can consciously decide, but you actually have to learn to rewire at the subconscious level to create behavioral changes. So at an overarching theme, we get conditioned through repetition and emotion. So it is very possible for somebody, for example, to be securely attached, go through a lot of pain. Like, let's say somebody's securely attached and at 12 years old, God forbid, they lose their parents in a car accident. Like, they are going to become anxiously attached after. They're going to have these big abandonment wounds. So things will imprint us. But it's not always so simple. We require a certain degree, a lot of repetition and emotion across time. So usually we don't build neural pathways that are strong enough to stick until at least around 21 days of consistent repetition and emotion. And the other thing that's really important is that the first 3 years of our life, and second to that, from ages 3 to 8 years old, our brains are producing a lot more alpha and theta brainwaves, which means our subconscious mind is very suggestible. It's almost like being in a light state of hypnosis. We are just sponging up information. It's part of why children learn so quickly and absorb so much. And that means that whilst that conditioning is going to run really deep, it can change, but it's more sticky. So we have to do a lot of concerted effort or be exposed to a lot of things repeatedly over time to truly rewire. And we can learn to leverage that to rewire what's not working. But unfortunately, society, reality can sometimes work against us, where you could take somebody who's secure. They could have really tumultuous or traumatic experiences in high school or in their first young relationship. I was speaking to somebody yesterday and they said they were relatively secure in childhood, but then they were in a relationship from 14 to 21 years old that was extremely traumatic, and they came out of that a fearful avoidant. So a lot of repetition and emotion across time will rewire, and that can be something that works against us, or we learn about how it works and we can work on our own behalf.
Cool. So, okay, let's talk about 3 other attachment styles.
Yeah. So they sort of exist in a way along a continuum. Okay. So at one end of the continuum, you have an anxious attachment style. This individual goes through real or perceived abandonment in childhood. Real abandonment is like you lose a parent growing up. Okay. The really traumatic things, or a parent's divorce, one parent just doesn't come back again. Perceived abandonment, and what's really interesting from a neuroscience viewpoint, is that a lot of repetition and emotion of small t trauma will actually have a similar impact as a singular big T trauma on the mind. And so you can have people who they have inconsistency in childhood, and that creates perceived abandonment. So let's say you have 2 loving parents, but they're always working, they're always traveling. And at a young age, this child's like, they really need their parents and they're working a lot, they're traveling a lot. That can cause a child to feel like love is here, love is taken away. Love is here, love is taken away. Love is here, love is taken away. I'm always bracing for love to be taken away. And so it can still create and foster those abandonment wounds at a subconscious level if there's not a good understanding of why that's happening, or that the child is loved, or that the parents are coming back. So these types of situations create anxious attachment styles, and they end up having big triggers. In our body of work, we study the triggers of each attachment style. And so the triggers of the anxious attachment style are, I will be abandoned, the fear of being alone forever, being disliked, rejected, excluded, unloved, or unsafe if they don't have people. And as a result, they cope or adapt to these big triggers and wounds through always trying to maintain proximity. They're like, let me win people over, let me make sure people like me. And on the good side, they tend to be very charming and charismatic and likable. On the difficult side, they often cling so much in relationships that they accidentally push people away. They often choose emotionally unavailable people to invest in. And we'll talk about why we attract the people we do, or are attracted to the people we are. And they also end up in situations where they people please into oblivion. They forget to take themselves into consideration. They don't show up for their own needs and boundaries. And they often can be underdeveloped in we have 7 areas of life: career, financial, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, relationships. And they usually get so preoccupied with their relationships that sometimes they put their career goals on the back burner, their financial goals, because they're so focused and fixated on developing or deriving their sense of self through other people.
What I've also noticed from people who are this anxious attachment style, I've noticed that they will take more from people. So what I mean is, like, for me, if someone does or says something that is like crosses a boundary where it's like, you can't be talking badly behind my back, you certainly cannot say something rude to me to my face just because you're a mean person, you're cut. I don't have time in my life for that, right? I think the anxious attachment style, and you tell me what you think as well, but what I've noticed is they take a lot more. because their capacity for like what they're able to deal with before they're like, I'm out, is like almost like bigger. You know what I mean?
So you're not saying take more from people, like take their time and energy and resources.
No, what I mean is like they just
put up with a lot more.
Yeah, they put up with a lot more. Whereas I think like with Secure, and we can talk about the other two as well, but I think like for Secure, I can speak for myself and like my other friends and people I know who are secure as well. Like they don't put up with as much. Like they have like very clear boundaries around like what they're willing to take and what they're not.
You are absolutely correct. So in our programs about healing your attachment style, we have 6 key pillars, and one of them is boundaries. And like the known thing about anxious attachment styles is they're boundaryless.
Yes.
And so it causes them to stay in the wrong relationships for far too long. They ignore red flags in relationships. A lot of the time they justify them. It's actually, from a neuroscience perspective, it's because our subconscious mind is wired to get our needs met, and they don't know how to meet their own needs very well. And wherever we struggle to self-source, we will try to constantly source from other people, and sometimes with too much pressure. But we have this mechanism in our brain called the RAS, or reticular activating system, and it filters out information according to your needs. So what ends up happening is anxious attachment styles, they get into relationships and they get so hyper-focused on just trying to get their needs from other people that it's like, okay, well, you could call me names, you could be verbally abusive, you could be extremely unhealthy, you could be breadcrumbing me all the time, but like you're the source of my needs and I can't let you go. And they can often be quite addicted to the intermittent reinforcement of unhealthy relationships. And because they have such poor boundaries, they just don't consider themselves. And just like you said, they put up with so much more than is necessary.
So then if you are like, there's someone in your life, like say it's like your best friend or like your like some family member who you care deeply about, who is this attachment style, and you notice that they have really toxic patterns within a relationship, can you do anything to help them?
It's a really good question. Yes and no. You can be a supportive friend and you can be a truth teller and you can lead by example. But unfortunately, we're going to do the things that we do at a subconscious level because of our own patterns. So the big themes for each person to heal is they have to rewire their triggers. So we're not born with the fear of being not good enough, disliked, abandoned, rejected, alone, all these things I was mentioning for the anxious. So we have to start by actually leveraging neuroscience, and I'll share maybe a tool at the end or something to help with that. But we can rewire those triggers. Then we have to learn, and this is huge for anxious attachment styles, they have to learn what their needs are in relationships, but then how to meet them themselves first. That is one of the most powerful healing steps for them, because that's a big part of how we self-soothe. We know what we need. So for example, anxious attachment styles, a lot of their needs in relationships are validation, reassurance, certainty. And because they abandon themselves all the time and they put themselves down and they're always people pleasing, they're taking away from their act of giving themselves validation, reassurance, certainty, these types of things. And they have other needs, but those are some good ones to start with. And so we have to learn to meet our needs, and we have to do it through repetition and emotion every day across 21 days to really build in those neural networks that are strong enough to be likely to stick. And that's a huge principle of healing. Then we have to regulate our nervous systems. There's some good, exercises people can do on a daily basis that are somatic to learn to stay in their body, sit with their emotions, attune to themselves, basically give to themselves what they didn't get in childhood. And then they have to relearn their boundaries and how to communicate properly. Because the other thing that's kind of sad, a little bit tragic for anxious attachment styles, is they're so scared to take up space. So they end up, like you said, putting up with so much in relationships. And they're like, oh, I can't communicate my needs or my boundaries because people are going to think I'm a burden or not like me. But then eventually they just can't take certain things. So they will communicate, but they communicate from criticism. So they'll say like, you don't care about me. You never spend any time with me. And unfortunately, communicating from criticism is not actually communicating. Instead, we want to use positive framing, saying things like, hey, I feel disconnected. I really would love to spend more time together. Why don't we plan a fun date night this weekend? Like that gets you heard. But when you say you don't care about me, you don't spend enough time with me, people don't listen to you. And so anxious attachment styles go through these cycles of feeling like, I never get to speak up. I never try. I pour into people. I don't get received back in terms of my needs. And then when I finally say what I need, nobody hears me. And it's because of the way that they're communicating. So those are really important principles of the 6 pillars. You can rewire behaviors. So the clinging, the texting, the calling, a lot of those things that they do to maintain proximity. But
how do you rewire that?
Yeah. So we'll go down a rabbit hole here for a second.
Because the reason is because I think like how I want to structure it is kind of do a deep dive into each attachment style first. Yeah. Because like if, for example, someone is listening and they're like, I'm anxious, I don't want them to now have to like listen to like the others before, you know what I mean? Yeah. So like let's just give the anxious people everything.
Okay, so we'll do this. Okay, so I'll give 2 tools if that works.
Love that.
So let's start with one of the first things is the reason people cling text constantly is because they have abandoned themselves and they're trying to soothe exclusively for somebody else, but their trigger is up. So I always give the analogy first. I'll give a bit of a background for this tool. So I give the analogy that your triggers are like your personal version of a bear in the woods. If you were to go into the woods tomorrow and see a bear and the bear chases you and you get away, thank goodness, but you have to go into the woods the next day, what do? You are like on the lookout for the bear. If you hear the tree move and the wind, you're like, the bear is coming. Yep. So our mind is wired to hang on to negative things, and negative things, by the way, more than positive things, so that we can protect ourselves from them. If the bear's chasing you, you don't tell your friends later on, oh, I saw such a beautiful set of flowers while the bear was chasing me. You're like, the bear's teeth are what you remember. And so we're wired to hang on to negative things. It imprints our subconscious mind. And then we reproject them back out to protect ourselves. So you're like looking for the bear, constantly think the bear is coming. And that in turn is going to affect your behavior. So if you think the bear is coming, you have all these negative emotions, cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, that triggers your body to move into sympathetic nervous system mode. And so we have this sort of cascade of things that happens. Every attachment style has their versions of bear in the woods. As an anxious attachment style, if you grew up feeling like you were going to be abandoned, then we hold on to that. Then you project that into the future. You're bracing for it. And then you start trying to cope with that. Just like somebody might run from the bear. You might go, no, I need to make sure they like me, and text them a bunch or keep calling to see and to try to gain that certainty. So the first set of steps that we have to do is to actually deal with those reactions, those behaviors. We start by rewiring at the root. So the trigger itself. You're not born believing that you're not good enough, alone, disliked. We store those and we project them. So step one, there's actually a 3-step solution to this. Step one is you want to find the trigger, and it's opposite. We covered all the main anxious attachment triggers already. So you want to pick 1 or 2 at a time. And let's just say for the sake of this, we say, okay, not good enough. Okay. The anxious attachment style is constantly thinking people think they're not good enough, that they're not doing enough. So what is the opposite? I am good enough. Now, we have 2 more steps. I don't believe in affirmations very much. I know that's people like to get upset about that, but I'm not a believer in affirmations. And here's why. Because your conscious mind doesn't speak, or your conscious mind speaks language, your subconscious does not. If I say to you, whatever you do not think of the red balloon, you think of the red balloon. Your conscious mind heard do not, but it was too late. Your subconscious flashed it. Nobody is consciously waking up choosing their core wounds. Nobody's waking up being like, oh, today I'm going to tell myself I'm not good enough 47 times and see how I feel. So the wound is stored at a subconscious level in that warehouse of your brain. So we have to use our conscious mind to speak to our subconscious mind. And the way we do this is through memory. Every memory we have is actually a warehouse or a little container for emotions and images. If I were to say, tell me your favorite childhood memory, and you said, oh, I was playing on the playground with my friends, you would see the images of maybe the red slide in your brain. And we've all seen people, when they tell an old story, they laugh, they smile, they're happy. Or when somebody tells a sad story, they cry. And so what we're actually going to leverage is 10 pieces of memory. We use 10 for repetition. So we say 10 times, I actually felt good enough. Oh, I was a good friend last week. I had a hard conversation 3 days ago and I'm proud of it. We can even look at characteristics that we know that we have that we think make us good enough as people. So we're going to write out 10 times we actually felt good enough, because then we're leveraging emotion and repetition with 10, and the imagery, because they're actual memories. And then we record it down. So you can write it down, or ideally you record yourself saying it out loud, and you listen back for 21 days. Now, we actually can fast track it a little bit more in that 21 days to really solidify those neural networks by listening in a suggestible state. So this is when our brain is producing more alpha brainwaves. Our subconscious mind is more open to sponging up information. That's in the first hour that we wake up, the last hour that we go to sleep, or also after meditation, or after breath work, or after intensive exercise where your mind's really still when you're tired. All those times we're producing more alpha brainwaves. So in summary, in order to change those behaviors, and we'll talk about a second exercise to rewire behaviors, but we have to start with the root. What trigger or wound is causing you to have those behaviors? Oh, you're trying to text somebody and explain yourself because you feel not good enough. Good. Let's go through the steps. Step 1, I'm not good enough. I am good enough. Step 2, 10 times I actually felt good enough. Step 3, record back, listen back for 21 days. It takes 2 to 3 minutes a day. And we've studied this with over 60,000 people who've been through our programs. And people who report actually moving through the entirety of the 21 days have a 99.7% NPS score, success score, at moving through this exercise and actually healing the wound. So it's very effective. Yes, it takes 2 to 3 minutes a day, but it's way more work to not do the work and to keep carrying the wound.
2 to 3 minutes. It's like if that completely like, puts you on a path that you're changing the way that you could be just relating to people. I mean, it's the biggest life-changing tool in the world.
Absolutely. And it's work I've done on myself. I wasn't the anxious, but I was another attachment style, and like I was the fearful avoidant. And one of the biggest things I noticed in my own life is I had so many triggers, so many wounds coming out of childhood and going into my teenage years. And I couldn't believe how much mental, emotional real estate I got back. It was like all this stuff that was focused on, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. Oh my gosh, I'm unworthy. I'm going to be betrayed. All these fears that I would focus so much of my time and energy into. When I wiped them out, it was like, oh my gosh, I have all this room to learn and to grow and to build a business and to do things I like and design my life. And it's just such a great gift for people to give to themselves.
Okay, so that's one tool. What else?
Okay, so another tool is when we want to, and we'll go down a little rabbit hole here too, trying to think of how big the rabbit hole will be, but when we want to rewire behaviors, any behavior we take part in is because we perceive more benefits than costs to that behavior at a subconscious level. So for example, let's say we have little Bob. Little Bob's a 5-year-old. He throws a temper tantrum. When he cries and screams, his parents come and say, oh, Bobby, it's okay, honey. Here's some candy. Oh, don't worry. Well, Bob's conditioning is such that he probably starts building more positive than negative associations next to that behavior. I throw a temper tantrum, my needs get met. I throw a temper tantrum, I get candy, I get attention, I get love. So he is very likely to have wired in that when he gets angry, he yells, he freaks out.
He gets his way, yeah.
Exactly. So fast forward. Now Bob's a 40-year-old man and he's the CEO of a company. He can't really be throwing temper tantrums as an adult. But our conscious mind can evaluate that and say, yeah, I know better. I should stop doing that. I should stop raising my voice. I'm pushing away my wife. I'm upsetting my kids. But how many times have we seen in all aspects and avenues of our life that we still do things even though we know better? We eat the chocolate anyways. Yep. We, everybody's had this example in some form or another. And so what's happening is for us to be partaking in the behavior, we perceive more benefits than drawbacks. So what we do is we're actually going to rebalance those stored emotional associations. And how we do that, which is very cool and is very effective, is step one, we look at all of the costs of the behavior. So what are all the costs of, as an adult, I'm Bob and I'm yelling at people and I'm pushing away my wife and my kids. What are all the costs? We want to come up with at least 10 to 15. Ideally, if we can throw out like 20, 30, it's amazing. Then the other thing we want to understand is that our behavior is meeting a need. As a kid, maybe little Bobby felt that when he screamed and cried, he got seen and heard. Okay, so I'm trying to get seen and heard when I raise my voice. And it's something people often do, right? They raise their voice to get bigger and louder. So I have to come up with a new behavior that's going to meet those needs in a healthier way. Let's say I'm going to be more vulnerable when I communicate, so I'm more authentic and I'm more understood. Better behavior. Now I'm going to write 15 benefits of the new behavior, okay? Now I've recalibrated the emotional associations, but we can't stop there because it's our conditioning. We're not just trying to do this at a conscious intellectual level. We're trying to drive it into the subconscious. So next step, I record myself saying those things out loud. Here's all the costs of those behaviors. I give specific examples. So I'm leveraging imagery, emotion. Here are all the benefits of this new behavior. I'm going to practice vulnerability. Instead, record it. Listen back for 21 days in a suggestible state. And what we're doing is we're recalibrating the emotional associations next to the unhealthy behavior. And so for anxious attachment styles, that would be things like clinging, calling too much, self-abandoning, self-silencing. Those would be the unhealthy behaviors. What are we going to do instead? And it's called our cost-benefit rewiring tool.
I love that. I mean, both are incredible tools. So my follow-up question is actually for parents. So I know that I'm sure a lot of people in our audience are parents to younger kids. If they are working parents, as an example, how can they ensure that they are not raising, anxious attachment style children?
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful question because obviously in society today, most people can't get by on a single income, all those things. So the first thing is that when you're there, ideally you're staying attuned, right? So when you're there, you're present. Quality always trumps quantity. Okay.
Love
and
that.
I get so many parents who say to me, Thais, oh my gosh, but I yelled at my child last week. Did I ruin their attachment style? it's conditioning. So we're humans, okay? So if people are like 90% of the time showing up healthily, they're attuned, they care, and 10% of the time you make a mistake, that's not going to change your child's attachment style, right? So it's when we're sitting closer to 60-40, 70-30, even 50-50, of course. So when we have more negative than positive behaviors that are not going to foster security. So if people are working, number one, be attuned. Again, quality over quantity. You don't have to sit at home when you've got a million things to do, like clean your house, cook dinner, all these things, and all of a sudden drop everything and only be attuned to your child, but actually parking healthy time for attunement so that the child knows that need is met. For example, maybe you have 30 minutes before bed where you read them a book or you hang out with them, you ask about their day, you're fostering this openness, this vulnerability, this connection, and they know like, okay, if I need something, I can go to my parents. They care about me. They may be imperfect at times because human beings are, but they care. They're here. So that's number one. Number two is if you ever think that your children have any of those wounds, one of the best things to do is repeatedly speak to its opposite. So if So if you feel like your child has the wound of feeling not good enough or insecure, maybe it's something they picked up from childhood, from their school, exactly, from like being bullied or something. Constantly showing them where they are good enough and giving specific examples. So it's not just intellectual and intellectualized. It's things like, oh, look at what you did on your test last week. You worked so hard. Oh my God, you know what? You're such a sweet friend. Look at what a good brother you are or sister you are. So we're giving that really clear feedback. And if we speak repeatedly to the opposite of the wound, it will go away. Yeah. And so that's huge for kids. And then also, asking children what they need. Building needs literacy is such a fundamental part of not just self-soothing, but them feeling like they understand themselves as adults. And one of the biggest things I see in our programs is that people get into their 30s, 40s, and they're like, what am I doing? I'm in a career I don't like. I'm in a relationship I wouldn't have chosen for myself. Because when we don't know who we are and what we need, and we don't get to know ourselves deeply at a young age, we're more likely to go into a direction that's inauthentic and not true for us. Yeah,
then I think you're just living life on autopilot and you're just like reacting to it versus like going out and seeking out the things that actually serve you. Because if you don't know who you are or what you want, then how can you go and look for those things for yourself?
Exactly. You absolutely nailed that. And so that's a huge part. So I would say those are really good places to start. I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole on that for a long time, but those are really good places to start foundationally.
Cool. Okay. So now we've covered the anxious attachment style as well. What's the next one?
Okay. So if you imagine that's on one end of the continuum, you can imagine the dismissive-avoidant being kind of on the opposite end.
The dismissive-avoidant?
Yes, okay. Dismissive-avoidant. So dismissive-avoidants grow up and their overarching theme is childhood emotional neglect. So a lot of people hear that and they think of like 3-year-olds trying to find dinner at 12 a.m. because the parent never came home. Of course, we can have like really overt, really extreme neglect, but that's not often what we see in society. The vast majority of the time, it's very covert neglect. So it's things like growing up in a family that's very stable. People, the kids are at school on time, dinner's on the table at the same time, there's structure, there's order. But as that child expresses emotions, nobody notices, nobody listens. The child expresses emotion, maybe it's like, hey, children should be seen and not heard. Or, okay, don't be a crybaby, get it together, come back when you're not so emotional. So children get this consistent, repeated messaging.
So it's not validating emotions from like a parent's or like just like an adult standpoint, essentially.
Exactly. So lack of attunement, big time, lack of awareness, but then actively denying, dismissing, or rejecting the emotions as well. Those tend to be those big themes. And it doesn't have to be in a really traumatic way. It doesn't have to be that the parents are yelling at the child for having emotions. The vast majority of the time, it's not like that at all. It's subtle, but it's consistent, and it gives the messaging to a child that like your emotions are not okay.
Well, it's the repetitive thing that you've talked about. Yeah,
exactly. And so we have this dismissive-avoidant who grows up feeling like, okay, this part of me is not accepted. It's constantly rejected. And children are wired for attunement. Like they need to be safe, seen, and special. And if those things are not missing, it creates dysfunction long term. And so you have this child who grows up, who doesn't feel seen, who doesn't feel safe to emotionally express and feels like their emotions are getting them rejected. So what do? They reject their own emotions. They're like, okay, this part of me is fundamentally flawed, fundamentally broken, and they end up internalizing a lot of shame from that. Childhood emotional neglect creates a lot of internalized shame for people. Now, dismissive-avoidants are very stoic, so you won't often know it, but they're often quite defensive. They don't deal well with criticism because it hits all those shame wounds, and they grow up in a few ways. They grow up adapting to that environment by being like, well, let me minimize my attachment needs. Let me minimize vulnerability. Let me keep people at arm's length. And if I don't need you, if you're my parent and I don't need you, well, then at least I feel relief because I'm not getting what I need from you. So let me just not need you. And that gives me a sense of control and emotional safety. So fast forward to their adult life. And what you end up seeing is dismissive avoidance as young adults are individuals who keep people at arm's length. They're slow to warm up. They struggle with connecting emotionally a lot of the time. They can connect intellectually very well. They tend to be very intelligent because they kind of disconnect from their emotional side of themselves and overinvest in the intellectual side of themselves. So they end up being very smart and logical and rational and grounded and quite consistent. But they have a hard time going out of their comfort zone because they don't feel emotionally safe to do so. They really struggle to connect and attune to what they're feeling. And they tend to be individuals that if things get too real or too much vulnerability is required or requested in relationships, they're like, no, I got to get out of here. And their big core fears in relationships or triggers are the idea that they're shameful or defective deep down. This huge wound around feeling like they are not good enough as well. And they often feel very afraid of being trapped because they felt very trapped in their childhood relationship, needing that vulnerability. They fear being weak if they're vulnerable, and they feel emotionally unsafe in conflict. As adults, they end up being partners who struggle with long-term commitments, or if they do get into a committed relationship, they kind of shut down even more emotionally because they don't like to feel vulnerable. They often start off in relationships and they're kind of charming and charismatic and sweet. And as soon as that attachment bond is actually triggered and built, they're like, whoa, this is too vulnerable. I feel too much. I don't like it. And then they start minimizing and pushing away. And they very much struggle to work through conflict, to share openly, to speak vulnerably about their feelings. And so they never really get their own needs met in relationships in the way that they need them. And often people on the receiving end are dissatisfied and they struggle in relationships too.
So then this attachment style, say they're going through conflict, like what are like some of the hallmarks of how they behave?
Yeah, they're really serious hallmarks too. It's such a good question. If you look at an anxious attachment style, they want to like, let's resolve it right now. And
it has to be right now. Gotta be right now.
You must know somebody.
Yeah. A lot of, I mean, look, I feel like everyone knows people, but I also have like, I'm very close to my friends where like, I'm also like good at, I guess like seeing people where they're at. So like, I feel like you can tell really quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And dismissive avoidants are like, let me go in the other room. Let me not speak about things. Let me not answer the text message. Oh, we said we're going to have the conversation. I'm not going to call you back. And so they literally dismiss, avoid, stonewall, ignore, shut down. Those are their behavioral coping mechanisms. And honestly, I see so many people through our programs and like the same kind of, a lot of anxious and dismissives get together. And we'll talk later about why. But it's like these kind of themes where there's an argument, the dismissive avoidant goes into the other room, closes the door, the anxious attachment style opens the door, follows them in, wants to deal with it right now. The dismissive avoidant leaves, goes back out into the hallway, tries to walk down the hall. The anxious attachment's like, wait, let's talk about it. Come on, we have to work through it. Why are you ignoring me? And you'll see these themes often play out in conflict. And you'll see too, even in small things like texting, the anxious attachment style, like when they have to wait for a text and they feel uneasy about something, their whole nervous system and body is like flooded with panic and distress, and they can't regulate and soothe and sit still, and they text. Dismissive avoidance, they're like the exact opposite. If they're feeling in a conflict, they'll be like, I need to put my phone away. I'm going to look at my phone. I feel relief by not dealing with it. Exactly. And they're trying to jet out of there.
So then what can someone do to heal that attachment style? Like if they are listening to this and they're like, damn, like I think I'm dismissive avoidant, like what do I do?
Yeah. So great question. So first thing is you want to plug in the same rewiring activity that we talked about, it's called auto-suggestion, the belief reprogramming, the 3 steps, not good enough, good enough. And you would do it a lot for defective is huge. They don't like to be seen because they think people are going to see them and then learn that they're defective. And so that's part of why they keep their barriers up and their walls so high. So rewiring this idea that they're defective and instead plugging in, I am normal, I'm acceptable, and doing that across 21 days with the evidence, the memories, is huge. Number 1. Number 2, obviously, they can also apply the cost benefit reprogramming on their actions, their behaviors of stonewalling, dismissing, ignoring. Number 3, to dive into something else, because we have different pillars, so we can kind of cover different pillars for each one, but regulating their nervous systems. I mean, one of the biggest things is they can't have the bandwidth to be there for you emotionally if they don't even know what the heck they're feeling. And what happens is, especially dismissive avoidance, they didn't get attunement, so they've never learned to attune to themselves. So they're very intellectual, very in their minds and very analytical. They're not really in their bodies. And when you're asking somebody to have emotional bandwidth or to talk about feelings that doesn't have the language, it doesn't have the understanding, it's like, oh, what do you want me to do about it? So part of their healing is to practice self-attunement, checking in throughout the day. I always get dismissive avoidance to start by being like, what am I feeling? What am I needing? What am I feeling? What am I needing? And setting their alarms for the day and trying to check in. And what it's forcing them to do is condition in the habit of being in their body and noticing sensations in their body, learning to self-attune to themselves. And at first they're a little slow. Like they're like, well, I don't know what I feel. And we give people a feelings wheel and they can start to practice identifying, but it actually allows them to get back in their body. And I get them to practice nervous system regulation. So there's different somatic practices to help actually feel their emotions, but also feel like they're able to process their emotions properly. And so that allows them to regulate their nervous system, move out of this fight or flight sympathetic nervous system that they're often in, move more into rest and digest, aka parasympathetic nervous system mode, stop feeling so numb all the time in terms of their emotions, and actually learn to see what's going on in their own internal world, which in turn gives them the emotional literacy to say what they need and feel in relationships. So we have the rewiring of the wounds, we have the behavioral rewiring, and then we have the nervous system regulation. And then I also get them to practice exposure work on vulnerability, which means if you've been, your whole personality has been built around not being vulnerable, it's going to feel highly uncomfortable to say, okay, now go be vulnerable to your wife or to your husband or to your partner. They're like, no, but we do it in titrated forms. So a daily small piece of vulnerability. So something like, hey, I had a hard day today. Or, hey, I could use a hug. Or, hey, and just having small forms of communicating, speaking. And through repetition and emotion, they actually start expanding out their comfort zone where originally they feel so adverse to being vulnerable, but through repetition over time, we start exposing ourselves to things that have a new impact and we condition in expanding our comfort zone in deeper relationships.
So why is it that this attachment style goes for the anxious, as you were saying?
Yeah.
Like what is attracting them to each other?
We are all attracted to our subconscious comfort zone. So there's a few things that drive attraction. Obviously there's like the biology of things, right? Like we're attracted to certain features from a biological perspective. But there's three things that actually drive attraction psychologically. Number one is we are attracted to people who express our repressed traits. We all have a homeostatic impulse. And if you are very assertive and I'm very passive and we attach my subconscious mind and your subconscious mind say, oh, we're whole now together. Okay. So we're attracted to that. That's why you hear opposites attract.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's early days. We're also deeply attracted, number two, to people who meet our deeply unmet needs. Okay. So if you felt unseen your whole childhood and somebody comes across you and makes you feel really seen as an adult, it's like fireworks for somebody's brain. They're like, oh my gosh. And often people will fall into limerence, these like extreme infatuations. It's actually a place where people will often cheat from in relationships. If they have a lot of that, that's a different topic for maybe another time. But those are our two initial drivers of attraction. Long term, we will invest in the most people who are the most familiar to us. What is the most familiar to us? The way we treat ourselves. So anxiously attached individuals, they are so busy people pleasing that they are dismissing and avoiding their own feelings, needs, and boundaries. So conscious mind says, I want the available person. I want the emotionally available person. Subconscious mind meets the unavailable person and goes, oh my gosh, there's a spark. What is this? And they end up investing in those people the longest because that person treats them the way they treat themselves. And at a subconscious level, your mind sees that as familiar and thus safe. And thus we are more likely to survive. And ultimately we're survival wired. On the flip side, dismissive avoidance, they are deeply in an anxious relationship to themselves. They're always worrying about how much time they have alone, time to do their own things. They're preoccupied with their own time and space.
Interesting.
Because they're hyper independent. So when people mirror that back to them, they end up being like, ooh, something about this feels familiar, and they won't understand why, but they'll often end up investing in those people too.
Wow, that is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So what is the fourth one?
So the last attachment style is our fearful-avoidant attachment style. So fearful avoidance, their big overarching theme in childhood is chaos or trauma. So you're looking at like more frequent big T traumas in childhood. As examples, it can be a really bad divorce. Kids are caught in the middle at a young age. It can be abuse, verbal, physical abuse in the home. It can be things like having a parent who's in active addiction, an alcoholic, a parent with narcissistic personality disorder. All of these types of things share something in common, which is that you never know which version of a parent you're going to get. So let's say as an analogy that the example is mom is an alcoholic. One day mom comes home, she's had a few drinks, she's in a good mood, she's nice, she's loving, she's warm. And the child is conditioned to feel like, oh, love is a good thing. I feel connected, I feel loved. Okay, this is really nice. And they get positive emotional associations about love and connection. Another day, mom's had too many drinks and she's angry and she's cruel and she's an angry drunk today. And that teaches a child that love is very scary and threatening and inconsistent and unreliable. And what felt so nice the other day, we were connected. Now you've broken my trust. You've really hurt me. And these themes are usually quite repetitive consistently throughout this child's childhood. And so what's really interesting is that a child basically learns that love is a good thing and a scary thing at the same time. Whereas we usually get sort of singular associations to things. And this causes a lot of inner conflict and inner turmoil for this person. And so while the anxious attachment style, their attachment strategy is to maintain proximity and closeness, the dismissive avoidance attachment strategy is to maintain distance and minimize their attachment needs. The fearful avoidance attachment style, their strategy is to basically predict everything that somebody will do. They become extremely hypervigilant, in other words. They are extraordinarily attuned to microexpressions, to body language, to changes in tone of voice. They notice anything and everything. I joke that fearful avoidants are like human lie detectors, and they track everything. And if somebody tells a story 3 weeks ago and then they told the story 3 weeks later and the story slightly changed, they're going to clock it. Like they really notice everything. And in a sense, that can be a superpower. Like fearful avoidants are really good at operating outside of their comfort zone and figuring things out because they usually had to grow up really fast, and they tend to go really deep into things and get fixated on things. But it also makes things very difficult in relationships because they're prone to constantly jumping to conclusions, to wanting love, but being scared of it at the same time. And so what fearful avoidants experience is they're sort of the partners as adults that are like, come here, get close to me. You get close and they're like, get back, stay away. And then exactly. And then you're like, okay, I'm getting back. And then they're like, wait, come back. I need you. And they're so hot and cold and push pull and they can't decide. And I was a fearful avoidant. It's part of how I got into this work. And, it's very hard to be on the receiving end of dating a fearful avoidant because they give all the mixed signals, hot and cold. They make people so confused. But also it's because that person in their own inner world is wanting something but scared of it at the same time. And it's almost, before I did a lot of the work and healing, I remember when, and I started pretty young, but when I would fall in love, I had 2 times I fell in love before doing the work. And it's a very bittersweet experience. You're assuming that the more you love and care, the more the person's going to hurt you. So you see the person as somebody you care about, but somebody who's also a threat to you. And it really feels like viscerally like that. And so you're sort of the roller coaster partner in relationships. You jump to conclusions. You push people away a lot out of self-preservation and self-protection. And there's a lot of like shutting down, stonewalling. Being spiteful in relationships is very common. And they tend to be more argumentative in relationships. And it's because it's just this inner turmoil that you experience when you are that attachment style.
Oh my gosh. And so is there, from the other 3 attachment styles, does the fearful avoidant try to go for one over the other?
Yeah, they tend to go the opposite of which way they lean. So fearful avoidants have an anxious and avoidant side to them. And if they are kind of more anxious leaning, they'll often be more attracted to dismissive avoidance or fearful avoidance that lean dismissive. If fearful avoidants are more dismissive leaning, so their coping is more related to shutting down and pushing away than being anxious and clinging, then they'll tend to move more towards anxious leaning people or anxiously attached partners.
So then we've kind of gone through different tools for each attachment style and like things that everyone can do, but is there another one that you can share for this attachment style?
Definitely. So we go through 6 pillars. So we kind of touched 2 each one. So the first pillar is the core wound exercise. So the rewiring your core wounds. The second one that we talked about was rewiring your behavior. So doing the cost benefit tool. Then for the dismissive avoidant, we talked about the nervous system work, and then the exposure work on actually showing up for your needs or your boundaries. One of the big ones for fearful avoidance, and I'll actually do 2 specifically because they're our last 2. One of the big ones is that fearful avoidants need to learn what they need, and they need to be showing up to communicate those needs to other people and meet them themselves. So what we see a lot is that fearful avoidance, we'll call the tools going into the boundaries and communication, are their 2 major pillars. So, and I'll speak from personal because I think I've helped tens of thousands of people through this, and this is congruent across everybody, but maybe it's helpful for people to hear from a more normal, personalized approach. So when I was fearful avoidants are very generous, they're very giving, they're kind of always overcompensating. So they tend to give a lot, but then they feel like, wait, nobody's showing up for me the way I'm showing up for other people. They're great in an emergency. If you have an emergency and you can get a hold of your fearful avoidant friend, call them. They are good at protecting, showing up. They're kind of like the dog in everybody's fight, extremely loyal to people. But what's really interesting is because you're like that, you have this side where fearful avoidants are really good at drawing information out of people, making people feel seen and heard, but they're very poor at showing up for themselves consistently and allowing themselves to lean on other people. The idea of leaning on people when you're a fearful avoidant and being left helpless is terrifying. And a lot of their core wounds, their triggers are not just being the fear of abandonment, being alone, rejected, but also the dismissive side, the fear of being trapped, helpless, powerless in relationships, weak if they're vulnerable, and they have a huge betrayal wound because they're constantly feeling like the other shoe's about to drop. They don't trust themselves. They don't trust other people. They definitely don't trust the environment. So you have all these wounds. You have to do the reprogramming of the core wounds big time. But they really meet other people's needs and not their own, and they never lean on people. It is one of the most healing things that you can do. After you rewire your core wounds and rewire some of your behaviors and regulate your nervous system, being able to know your needs and meet them is extremely self-regulating and very fulfilling and creates a lot of peace. But then I speak from personal example. I grew up being like, nobody cares about me. I care about everybody else. Nobody cares about me. And it's such a common theme for fearful avoidance because they let people lean on them and they support them, but they don't share and they don't open up about what they need. So what's really powerful in terms of trust, and I always say this to fearful avoidants fall into this trap where they think that trust equals you never, ever make a mistake. I can only trust people that never make a mistake. If you make a mistake, if you tell me a white lie, if you forget about something important to me, iced out, done. Yeah, they're so quick to pull the plug and run. And they take it so to heart. And that's not how trust is built. People are human beings. They're going to make mistakes sometimes. Trust is established when we learn to work through those things. So there's a really powerful healing process for fearful avoidance. And when someone hurts you, they don't meet a need, they forget something, they make a mistake, to go to communicate to that person and say, hey, you forgot to pick me up from the airport and like I felt really forgotten about and that really hurt me. And next time I need for you to be more consistent and show up and check in if I'm going to rely on you for something. And it doesn't mean that you then invest fully back in that person right away. But the next time that you ask them for a favor, you're vetting to see how they show up. And what you'll see is the people who deeply care about you and want to show up, they're going to be humans and they're going to make mistakes sometimes, but you're going to see progress. You're going to see that they show back up. And this is something that is so important for fearful avoidance in their healing journey because they spend so much time expecting perfection because they don't know how to trust. And the moment it's violated, it's like it seems to reinforce all these ideas that like, look, I could never trust. See, they let me down. And it's like, well, humans are going to let you down sometimes. We're not perfect. But it's what they do when you communicate and how much they care and try to make an impact to be different in the future. That